It's official. The rest of the NFL world is awaiting a decision from Aaron Rodgers before it can get on with its business. Plus, from Pro Football Focus, Sam Monson on the Packers offseason, the future of Aaron Rodgers, and of the wide receiver position, particularly in Green Bay. We discuss all of it on today's show.
You are Locked On Packers, your daily Green Bay Packers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Packers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Peter Bukowski, and I cover the Packers for The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts. Wherever you find podcasts, you'll find Locked On Packers, the number one Packers podcast on the internet, and the show for fans who know what happened. They want to know why and how. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. You get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Okay. Derek Carr met with the New York Giants, and they're very in. Not all in, but they're very in on Derek Carr. And Diana Rossini reported that there was a very personal conversation and presentation made to Derek Carr, essentially making the case to him that he could be, an all-time great if he wins in New York, which is actually, like, I know that we're going to think about what Devontae Adams said about playing with, Hall of Famers and Aaron Rodgers and Derek Carr. You win in New York, you are a made man. Like, that is true. If you win with the Jets, there is just something special about that. Mark Sanchez is still like a semi-revered figure in New York because they went to some AFC championship games. Imagine if you just went to a Super Bowl, and they could, with Derek Carr, they could go to a Super Bowl in New York if things break right for them. You get some good health, you have another good draft. Like, they could really be that good. With Aaron Rodgers, they are absolutely Super Bowl good. But what is clear now is something that I had, hinted at over the last couple days. What Diana said was the Jets will be very satisfied with Derek Carr. They want Derek Carr if the Packers are not going to give up Aaron Rodgers. That is how this is all being couched. Derek Carr is the consolation prize. And what Diana is saying fits with what I've said on the show and what I've been saying for a couple weeks now. And that is that the Jets are not just posturing with this Carr stuff. They would truly be happy, or at least some decision makers in that organization would be happy with Derek Carr and believe he is a good option, certainly an upgrade over what they have. I don't even think that's a controversial thing to say, but it is important to note that there are people in that organization who see Carr as a viable alternative to Aaron Rodgers, someone that they can win with. And I think it is completely reasonable for them to believe a minor upgrade in talent and they're a playoff team, a middling upgrade in talent and they are right in the mix in the AFC East to win that division, and a significant upgrade in talent, which Aaron Rodgers would be, and I think to a lesser degree, but also, still a major upgrade over what they had because Zach Wilson was that bad. Derek Carr puts them in the conference conversation. They are a legit contender with Aaron Rodgers. Now, the specter over all of this is what happens with Lamar Jackson. I think more teams get involved with Lamar Jackson. That is a different conversation. Like, Atlanta can talk itself into trading multiple first-round picks for Lamar Jackson because you're going to give him the contract. He's going to be part of your organization now for the next 5 years, and this is a long-term play. There's a much smaller group of teams willing to get involved with Aaron Rodgers. It seems like the Colts, they want to go young. My understanding, based on some conversations over the last couple of days, Carolina would like to go young. We don't really know what Tampa Bay wants to do. Could they just say, hey, it worked with Tom Brady, like, let's try and bring in Aaron Rodgers? Maybe. It seems like there's two teams for Rodgers, the Raiders and the Jets. Well, one of those teams not in the Derek Carr market. So if you're the Raiders, you should be putting on the full court press if you want him behind the scenes. We're all waiting. We're all waiting. And we just got the word yesterday that Brock Purdy still having significant swelling from this UCL issue. Their hope is that he's going to be back for the regular season, but a 6-month recovery from late February surgery would put him back on the field in late August. The season starts in early September. Is he even going to be ready to start the season? Are they comfortable with Trey Lance? Could the 49ers put on a late full court press for Aaron Rodgers? Would the Packers entertain that? Probably not. There's still so much to be decided in here, and Rodgers is the domino. He is the first domino, because then it's Derek Carr, then it's Jimmy G. The Commanders are saying all the right things about Sam Howell being the starting quarterback, but someone is gonna sign Jimmy G. I think it's going to be the Commanders. Now, is he the one you want to be running Eric Bieniemy's offense? I don't know. That's a cool thing that the Commanders did. It's a far less cool thing that the Chiefs. It's not a Chiefs problem. It's a league problem that no one thought, hey, let Eric Bieniemy get a shot at head coaching. Nick Wright on FS1 put together a pretty damning indictment of the league that basically any offensive coordinator that is in the Super Bowl gets a head coaching job in the last 5 years. And the exception is Eric Bieniemy. That Commanders team, I don't know. Are they going to be in on Aaron Rodgers? They're saying Sam Howell. Are they going to be in on Aaron Rodgers? I doubt it. So that really leaves two teams. That leaves the Jets. Now, but the Jets have publicly, essentially, now that this is if it's being reported, it is, I don't think Diana twisted anyone's arm. They want Aaron Rodgers. They're making it clear right now. Yes, we love Derek Carr. Again, I don't think this is posturing. This is not, they have to say this. No. They would be happy with Derek Carr. They want Aaron Rodgers. And they are, as of now, the only team that is making a very public show of affection for Aaron Rodgers. That is, in my humble opinion, the smart way to woo Aaron Rodgers. Be big. Let him know for sure, hey, buddy, we want you. We want you to feel appreciated. I know you haven't been feeling appreciated. I know that your girl doesn't appreciate you the way that I could. So let me just, like, that's what they're doing. And that's the right thing. That's the right way to handle Aaron Rodgers. Now, how does Derek Carr feel about that? I don't know that Derek Carr has really much standing on a type of way to feel about that. I think the Saints are still very much in play for Derek Carr. I think this is what you do when you're the Jets and you're trying to say all the right things to have your cake and eat it too, because they want one of Aaron Rodgers and Derek Carr. It's like there's two girls you want to ask to homecoming, and you're not sure the first girl is going to say yes. You're pretty sure the second girl would say yes, but you don't want to ask her yet. Like, that's a dick move. No doubt about it. Don't do that. But it is a position that the Jets find themselves in because they are a desirable location. And so I continue to believe that if Aaron Rodgers and the Packers decide that he's going to be traded, it's the Raiders or the Jets. I've gone back and forth on which team I think is going to do it. In a lot of ways, I continue to believe that it's going to be the Raiders, if for no other reason than it seems like these things, when one team is so publicly doing this, it is either a front or it is just not what ends up happening. Like, it is the quieter team that ends up with the superstar. But it's making me rethink being so. I had a lot of people ask me at the Super Bowl, where do you think he's going to go? I said the Raiders. Well, a week and a half later, and now I'm like kind of leaning back toward the Jets. I still don't think it's in Green Bay. I continue to believe it will not be in Green Bay. We're going to talk about that Green Bay offseason in just a second with Sam Monson from Pro Football Focus. Before we get there, today's episode brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if you win. So, put in a bet, same game parlay, maybe get some really nice odds on it. Put that bet in, and if you don't hit it, bonus bets right there. Bang, you can go and make some more bets with those bonus bets. Usually, when the way a sports book works is you put money in, and if you're wrong, they take it, and if you're right, they give you the money. They're going to give you bonus bets even if you're wrong, because you're joining FanDuel and because you listen to Locked On Packers. So don't miss your chance at a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn. FanDuel.com/LockedOn to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Joining me now from Pro Football Focus, Sam Monson. And Sam, there's plenty to talk about when it comes to the Green Bay Packers. That has been true for a number of years now. PFF put out a list of top free agents and destinations, costs, and I think a lot of people were struck by the amount of money that someone like Allen Lazard, for example, is expected to command on the open market. As you look at this team, though, it all starts with the quarterback. So if Brian Gutekunst called you and said, "Hey, I need your help," how would you advise him to change his approach depending on who the quarterback of this team is?
I don't think it really does change much, to be honest, depending on who the quarterback is. Obviously, the resources that they have change a little bit depending on who the quarterback is. But the bottom line is, whoever it is, whether it's Rodgers or Love, they need as much support around them as humanly possible. Like we saw last season, what happens if Aaron Rodgers doesn't have an ideal supporting cast or a great set of receivers around him anymore? Simply, you take Davante Adams off the team. He needs that now. And whether he always did is a debatable point, but now it's not a question. Like Rodgers, to be the best version of himself, for this team to go where it needs to go, they need to make sure that he has some high-end weapons to play with. If for no other reason than, you look at the other true contenders in the NFL right now, those guys either have that or they have Patrick Mahomes,
Right.
and that's what you're dealing with. So if you want to go and take a Super Bowl away from Patrick Mahomes or even just the NFC contenders, you're going to have to bring something like that to the table, because Rodgers on his own isn't going to get that done. And then if Jordan Love is the quarterback, it's the same story for a different reason. Like you need to make sure that a young quarterback has as many additions or as many weapons to help him out as possible.
As you look at the grades for Aaron Rodgers, even in years where he has not statistically been as great, he has tended to grade out pretty well for PFF. Where is the discrepancy, do you think, between the grades that he's getting and the productivity he's getting? Is it strictly supporting cast, do you think?
I think that's a part of it. I mean, you look at this most recent season, it almost exactly mirrors the last time he didn't have, a true #1 wide receiver, when Jordy Nelson went down and they didn't really have time or the available resources to go and get a different #1 receiver. They just had to kind of bumble through that season with what was left on the roster. And Rodgers had a PFF grade in the mid-70s somewhere, right? And the seasons either side of that were 90. It was elite Rodgers, very not elite Rodgers, and then elite Rodgers either side of it. And that's really been the story of his career, is that he's almost always had at least one legitimate high-end elite wide receiver, whether he ran through kind of Donald Driver, Greg Jennings, Jordy Nelson, Davante Adams. He's had at least one guy to hang his hat on. And even in the last couple of years, the argument was, as good as Davante Adams is, and he might be the best receiver in the NFL, it's not enough. You need somebody else. You need at least one other target in today's NFL, and they weren't really giving him that guy. And then if you take away the one guy that was a superstar, well, now you just don't have a receiving core.
And that is exactly what happened to the Packers this last season. They thought Sammy Watkins was going to give them more than he ended up giving them. Rodgers talked up Al Lazard, and I think we saw the ceiling of Al Lazard. He was still really efficient last season, but you can't build an offense around him. I will say for myself, I have evolved over the last few years looking at receiver value. And I think a lot of the stuff that PFF has been doing with their data studies has pushed my thinking forward on this, that receivers are more valuable than maybe we previously thought. And I wonder how you see that maybe changing the way that we view this position moving forward in terms of, the premium positions that we have, whether it's draft, free agency, trades, all those things.
Yeah, and the other thing is it's not a static landscape. What was once true 10 years ago is not true anymore. The
Right.
game is changing, and we sort of tend to think of these things as constants, and they're not. It's a moving landscape, and you need to kind of figure out where it's going. And maybe there was a time when you could get by with one elite wide receiver, and that was good enough for a good offense. We're just seeing across the league now that it's no longer true, if it ever was. All of the teams that have one superstar guy and nothing else they hit a ceiling. Now, maybe it's enough to take you quite far, but when when people sort of say, why is Buffalo not quite as good as they were? It's like, well, they haven't found somebody extra on top of Stephon Diggs. Gabriel Davis didn't step into that role. And what's the cap on Dallas? Well, CeeDee Lamb is their offense. And if CeeDee Lamb isn't firing, or, nobody else steps up, it's too concentrated on one guy. So we're sort of seeing across the league all these offenses that only have one real threat being capped in how good they can be. Whereas teams generally that are able to spread the ball around, that are able to rely on multiple targets, are better on offense, or at least don't seem to have that cap, or much more difficult to slow down and to stop. The only real, I think, exception to that is the Kansas City Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce, who Kelce really is their number one guy. But I guess the difference is it does seem to be impossible to stop him. Like, you might be able to take away what they've drawn up. You might be able to take away the initial play, but the ability that Kelce and Mahomes have to ad-lib during the play, I think makes them pretty much unstoppable. It's impossible to kind of zero in on him the same way it is for other traditional number one targets in the NFL.
And for a little while, that was seemed to be true of Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams. It was just in the playoffs, especially in that 49ers game in 2021, the 49ers did, and were really the only team in the Devontae Adams, Aaron Rodgers era that was able to successfully do it. Let's say you're guiding Aaron Rodgers, you're his spirit guide in the darkness. What are you telling him to do? What do you think is the best football situation for him in 2023?
I think the best football situation for pretty much any quarterback that's looking for a new home is the Jets. That's a playoff team. They should have been a playoff team this year. They weren't because of their quarterback situation. It's a playoff team next year with any kind of upgraded quarterback. With a guy as good as Aaron Rodgers can be, it's potentially a true contending team. The only downside they bring is you're in a really tough division. They've got to take the division away from Buffalo. They've got to survive Miami and the upgrades that they're continuing to make this offseason. You assume the Patriots won't be as bad as they were a year ago, and they never suck. So that's a difficult division to get out of and to do anything in. But on paper, the Jets have a team capable of making some real noise with a quarterback as good as Aaron Rodgers. And I think they have enough in the areas that he needs sort of directly to assist him. Like, the offensive line should be much better than it was this year because of everybody getting back healthy and an offseason to address a couple of weak spots there. They have, I think, enough when it comes to wide receiver help that he could make some noise. So yeah, to me, the Jets is the best situation available for any quarterback.
As you look at the Packers list of potential free agents to be, is there anyone that you go, they have to bring this guy back? Because I'm looking at it and kind of going, I don't know. I feel like they can probably get a facsimile of most of this stuff in either the draft or late stage free agency.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I think they've done a reasonable job of future-proofing a couple of spots. There are guys you would assume Devontae Wyatt steps into a bigger role next year, and
you would hope,
right? And I don't know that it's necessarily sort of fair to label him as a disappointment even in his first year. he just didn't really get much of a chance to play. And it's a position where sometimes it takes a little bit of time to transition, but next year would be the year they actually need him to step into that bigger role and do a job because of the departures they have on the defensive line. But you're right. Outside of that, I think you'd be kind of happy enough with the players that are walking away. Maybe Lazard is a guy you would want to keep around, but if the market is going to get crazy because wide receiver is such a kind of problem spot, just the lack of supply of them this season, then, you know, maybe there's just a number that you're not going to go beyond, and he should absolutely seek a better deal if he can find one.
Wyatt was one of those funny players, and I mentioned this on the show seemingly every week, that especially middle and then late in the season, it was like every week there are a couple of guys who cover the Packers that would tweet out the PFF grades. And it would be like, okay, top 5 players on offense, top 5 players on defense. And Wyatt was always on the list of top 5 players on defense. But then you look at the snaps and it's like, yeah, he played 10 snaps or he played 12 snaps. And so I'm wondering from sort of a data management standpoint, how you guys look at that, and have you done studies on, okay, if you're really good in a small sample size, how does that project forward? Because in something like basketball, we've seen if you're efficient in 10 or 15 minutes, generally speaking, in 2025, you stay pretty efficient. Is that true with snaps in the NFL?
Well, it is to an extent, but the problem is it doesn't necessarily translate sort of 10 snaps plus 10 snaps plus 10 snaps, like the individual games. Once you stack them all up and you're talking about like 200 snaps over the course of the year, being quite good in 10 snaps most weeks doesn't necessarily translate to being really good over 200 snaps when you add it all up. Like it's such a small sample size that we're basically talking like he would make one play in 10 snaps, which for a defensive lineman actually isn't a bad return, is a pretty good performance. But when you start stacking that all up and you end up with 200 snaps and he's made 10 plays, you know, all of a sudden it's not quite as impressive. And you start to sort of look at it and say, all right, at that stage, when you're into that kind of playing time, you need a little bit more consistent production and more of an impact. I think for him, it's really just a placeholder season. Like, we don't know what Devontae Wyatt is going to bring to the table yet. Anybody that liked his college tape coming out, and I was definitely one of them, would be, I guess, disappointed based off his return in year one. But a big part of that was playing time. Like, he was only ever in as a rotational guy. He barely got to feature. A lot of the snaps he was on the field for were not even kind of, you know, real, honest, you have an actual chance to make a play here type of snaps. Like, if somebody runs a screen, it's basically a snap wasted for you that you didn't really have a chance to impact the play on. So, but yeah, there's definitely a world where PFF grades, where a guy is outstanding in a small sample size, can definitely project forward and show something. Now, there are times where it doesn't happen. Last season, Jonathan Grenard for the Houston Texans had an insane pass rushing grade off a pretty small sample size, and they gave him a bigger role this year, gave him an opportunity to it, and it didn't happen at all. But you go back, you know, way back into the day, and Cameron Wake had like the most ridiculous pass rushing grade on like 250 snaps over the course of the season, to the point where we were saying they need to bench Joey Porter Sr. because like, he may be getting sacks, but he's not getting anything like the pressure rate that the guy behind him is getting. If they give this guy Cameron Wake some more snaps, like, he might really end up doing something special for them. And obviously he ended up becoming like arguably the best edge rusher of his generation, or certainly one of the top 2 or 3.
Yeah, I think that's one of that tricky things. And I think we saw it a little bit with Rashawn Gary too. I mean, early in his career, he started to put things together. He was getting 10, 15 snaps, and then all of a sudden he got that bigger role, and he turned into a monster. He also got better. And that's one of those tough things that I think is tricky as we try and project these players. It's not always linear, right? In the way that guys get better, and sometimes they look good as rookies. And we saw this with Eric Stokes. He took a big step back as a sophomore. That doesn't mean he won't be good in year 3. He might get worse. We don't, like, this is all kind of difficult to project. As we look forward here for the Packers into the offseason, if you're trying to identify, you know, mock drafts and free agent, they're not going to have a lot of free agent money, but where are the positions where you're going, okay, these are the 2 or 3 spots where they could really stand to upgrade this roster?
Yeah, I think when you look at them top to bottom, it is still a pretty good roster. I mean, obviously wide receiver, I think, is an area where they could use just an influx somewhere. I like the potential of Christian Watson, obviously what he showed. I think there's probably still some kernel of truth to the hype with Romeo Doubs. Like, I think he can become a player down the line for them.
They still love him for what it's worth.
Yeah. I think it was probably just everybody kind of lost the run of themselves a little bit because the need for a wide receiver was so desperate. And it's like, well, it's going to be Dobbs, right? He'll be the number one guy. And then all the problems are solved. And that was probably always a little bit ambitious. But I think the combination of
Aaron Rodgers was a big part of that too, because he was gassing Romeo Doubs as much as anybody.
Yeah. And I'm sure a big part of it was like, I mean, he needs to. It's like, there's no other alternative here. Like, if somebody doesn't step up, I have nothing. Yeah, so let's try and let's almost speak it into existence. Let's manifest this by hyping the guy up. But I think there's a world where both Watson and Romeo Doubs become like a pretty important and useful part of this offense. I think you still probably need the third guy somewhere to step in and really be a player that they can work with. It's not a good group of free agent wide receivers at all. Jacoby Myers, I think, is probably the best wide receiver available, period. Assuming you're not dipping into trades, which is absolutely possible. But it's always a good year for drafting wide receivers. Like, the draft has been extremely strong now for multiple seasons at wide receiver. I think it's going to be another year with a lot of good wide receivers. So I think if they draft another guy and potentially plug him right in, all of a sudden you have this really young receiver core that could be good for a few years going forward. And then tight end is obviously a position where they need to add somebody.
Do you have a favorite of this draft class? I know it's pretty early. We haven't even had the combine yet, but it seemed like it was Michael Mayer first. Now Dalton Kincaid is getting some run. Luke Musgrave. Like, there's guys that people really, really like. Do you have a favorite?
I think Mayer is the best tight end in this draft. Like, he's the most complete guy. He's the cleanest prospect. He's the guy I think that's going to be best in the most areas and probably quicker. Kincaid, though, is definitely somebody that I think you should absolutely be interested in. Like, he may be a better receiving option as a tight end. I don't know if he'll be the complete player that Mayer is, but in today's NFL, that's less important than it's ever been before. You know, you don't necessarily need a guy who can be even much of a blocker at all if he's a legit receiving weapon. So I think those two guys are both first round talents, and would absolutely be a kind of reason to go after them.
Could be people the Packers are interested in, and are going to be a popular mock draft target for sure. Sam, I appreciate the time.
No problem.
All right, thanks to Sam for joining the show. The difference between his grade and the productivity thing is an interesting question. There was a chart that I tweeted out the other day about the wins above replacement, and Aaron Rodgers like bottom 5 among starting quarterbacks in those metrics. I kind of don't think that the PFF grades are right. I think he played better than the stats indicated at times, and I think he played worse than the stats indicated at times because of the run after catch ability of someone like Christian Watson, because of what the offense was able to produce for him. Now, he still made a lot of big time throws, and I still think he can play at a high level. I still think he can be good for a team. I still think he could be good in Green Bay. But I think it is time for Jordan Love. I've made that abundantly clear. And you know who else has? Tyler Dunn. He wrote about Jordan Love. He's going to be on the show later this week talking about that piece. Talked to his personal QB coach, Steve Calhoun, who I have talked to for The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to, and players, and has some great perspective on what Jordan Love can be for Green Bay. Ty has been on this since the beginning. He thinks, he was on my show 3 years ago saying, this is an inspired choice to bring in Jordan Love and give yourself the chance to have the next great guy. Even if he's not, you're giving yourself that opportunity. And that is a smart gamble. I'm with him. So we'll see what he has to say. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts. Wherever you find podcasts, you will find Locked On Packers. And anytime you want to come hang out with us live, whenever Aaron Rodgers makes his decision, whenever he emerges from the darkness and we get something, we will be live on YouTube so you can stay Locked On Packers.